Happy New Year, everyone. Welcome back to the channel. Today is January 2nd, 2023. 2022 has come and gone. It flew by just like that. And I read so many books. I've never read this many books in my entire life. 2022 was basically the first year that I've ever read all year long. I picked up a total of 64 books. I had 4 DNFs. And I'll tell you what those were in just a moment. But in this video, I'm going to do like a Boo and Book Awards, okay? So I wanted to include every book that I read and give them a little award. I broke it up into 11 categories, okay? And I have them printed on here so I don't forget anything. So there are 11 categories. There will be 11 winners. And yeah, let's get started because this cannot be a 40-minute video, okay? I'm not going to give you like plot synopses or anything. I will discuss all the books that I read in December 2022 since I didn't do a December wrap-up. I do want to talk about those very briefly. There was one DNF in that, unfortunately, and yeah, so without further ado, let's just jump right into the awards. Like I said, I have this handy dandy sheet here so I don't forget a thing. There's 4 pages. I did pick up 64 books. I did DNF 4 of those. The Turn of the Screw by Henry James from 1898. Just couldn't get into that one. The Lottery and Other Stories by Shirley Jackson from 1949. I read about half of those, I think. I just wasn't into it. The Ultimate Halloween by various artists in 2001. I did read all those short stories, but I did not read the novella at the very end, so technically it was a DNF. The last DNF I had for the year is one that was from December. I read a third of it, and I just couldn't get into it. I was not interested. I was bored. It was putting me in a reading slump, and that is The Daughter of Dr. Moreau by Sylvia Moreno Garcia. Unfortunately, this one was just too boring for me personally. I know a lot of people like it. I've heard it compared to Mexican Gothic in the way it's told. It's very slow. Mexican Gothic worked for me. This one did not. Maybe it's because I read The Island of Dr. Moreau in November. I really enjoyed that one. And so immediately going into this one, pretty much, I just wasn't interested in it, unfortunately. I did read a third of it. And I was going to maybe try to carry on with it, but I just could not continue with it, unfortunately. So those are the only 4 books that I DNF for the year. I really don't like to DNF a book. It really has to be just very boring for me in order to do so. There are some of these that I did complete this year that I probably should have DNF'd, but just my personal preference. I don't like to do it unless I'm just absolutely bored with it. So yeah, those were the 4 DNFs I had for 2022. There are some books that I'm not going to include in categories for like awards or whatever. Those would be the 2 coffee table books that I read and flipped through. One was the Halloween art book based on the 1978 John Carpenter classic. Really loved looking through that. I also flipped through and read everything about the horror movie posters coffee table book. That was really cool to flip through as well. There were 4 nonfiction books that I read. Well, basically nonfiction. One was a memoir. That was Elvira, Mistress of the Dark by Cassandra Peterson, published in 2021. I loved reading about her life. She's such a fantastic person. I love her. The other 3 books that were sort of nonfiction, I guess. One would be How to Survive a Horror Movie by Seth Graham-Jones from 2007. The other is Lore, Monstrous Creatures by Aaron Mahnke from 2017. And then finally, An Illustrated History of Ghosts by Nobrow. So yeah, I'm not going to include those in any kind of awards. Those were decent reads. I really enjoyed Lore, so you might want to check that one out. 7 of the books that I read this year were from Richard Matheson. So if you've been following me for a while, I did 2 videos dedicated to Richard Matheson back in May. I think one of them might have been in June. But the first one was ranking all 7 books that I read. And the second one was the top 10 short stories that I really enjoyed by Richard Matheson. So I will link that above and maybe below if I can figure out how to do that. I really enjoyed those. Unfortunately, none of them made it into my top 10. If you're interested in checking out my thoughts on those, definitely go check out that video after you finish this one. So that leaves us with 47 books divided among 10 different categories. There is one last category I'll get to at the end, which will be my top 10 horror recommendations that I read for the year. The ones I absolutely loved, the ones I think you all should read at some point in your lifetime. So stay tuned to the end to see what my top 10 were. The first category is going to be one that is outside of my normal reading genre. That is my favorite LGBTQ plus books. There are 5 books in this category. The nominees are Camp by Elsie Rosen, Here's to Us by Becky Albertelli and Adam Silvera, Golden Boys by Phil Stamper, The Guncle by Stephen Rowley, They Both Die at the End by Adam Silvera. And the boo goes to The Guncle by Stephen Rowley. Yes, I really love this story. Actually, when I ranked these, I read them back in June, and this came in 3rd back then, but the more I thought about it, the more I just really thought about this one the most, and I really enjoyed it. If you're into LGBTQ plus stories, this is about a former actor who is taking care of his young niece and nephew for the summer. It's super cute, it's super fun, it's very adorable, filled with love, dealing with grief. It just has it all. I can't recommend it enough. So this is definitely my favorite LGBTQ plus story of the year. The next category is favorite Halloween book. There are 4 books in this category. The nominees are Hocus Pocus and the all-new sequel by A.W. Jantha, Autumn Crow by Cameron Chaney, Dark Harvest by Norman Partridge, The Halloween Tree by Ray Bradbury. And the boo goes to Autumn Crow by Cameron Chaney. This is a collection of 6 or 7 short stories, all centered around Halloween, take place on Halloween, in this creepy little town called Autumn Crow, where it's Halloween every day. They all kind of sort of connect. I really liked most of these stories in this collection. Cameron is a huge booktuber on YouTube, so I'm sure everyone knows who he is. And a lot of people have read it. If you have not, I definitely recommend it for Halloween. It is my favorite of the year. Next is favorite indie book. I read 3 books, actually 4 if you count Autumn Crow, which I'm not including in this category. I wanted to try to do 1 book for each category, so some of these could be spread out among different ones, but that leaves us with 3 books that I read this year. They are all on the shorter side, but the nominees are The Houseplant by Jeremy Ray, Don't Call It All by Robbie Miles, Pray Without Ceasing by Andrew Franks. And the boo goes to Don't Call It All by Robbie Miles. This is a middle grade story, and it is about a middle schooler who wants a cell phone, and his parents won't get him one, and then he runs across this creepy man, and he promises to give him the cell phone, but he can't give it back. It is such a good story. I was really surprised by this one. I don't really read middle grade, and yeah, I really enjoyed this one, and I highly recommend this one. So the rest of these categories, I divided them by the century they were published in, or the decade. And so there'll be 1800s, 1900s, Y2K, and then more recent releases. The next category is favorite 1800s classic. I read 5 classics. I really enjoyed all of them, honestly. So this was pretty difficult for me to narrow down. But the nominees are Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, published in 1818. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson from 1886. The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde from 1891. The Island of Dr. Moreau by H.G. Wells from 1896. Dracula by Bram Stoker from 1897. And the boo goes to Dracula by Bram Stoker, of course. I really enjoyed this one. I was very nervous to read classics because, you know, they're so old and they were written in a different time, so they talk different, the writing was different. But none of these were really difficult to get through, and I was really surprised by that. But I had to give it to Dracula because it is such a classic. It is very well known, and it is very intriguing, even though Dracula himself doesn't appear on many of the pages. But yeah, if you've not read Dracula, I definitely recommend it. Next, we have the 1900s classics. Okay, so maybe one of them is not considered a classic, but what else can I call this category, you know? There are 4 books I read from the 1900s, not counting Richard Matheson, which, you know, all of his were written in the 1900s. But the rest of the ones that I read are Lord of the Flies by William Golding from 1954. The Exorcist by William Peter Blatty from 1971. Dark Mountain by Richard Wayman from 1987. Jurassic Park by Michael Crichton from 1990. And the boo goes to Jurassic Park by Michael Crichton. Unfortunately, Jurassic Park couldn't appear live in this video. I've already sold that one. Sometimes I do sell books that I really enjoy. I do want to get a better copy of that because I do want to read The Lost World. And so I know there is like a Barnes & Noble special big edition that has both of them combined, so that I really want to get that one at some point. That's why I sold it. But Jurassic Park is definitely a classic. Some consider it horror. It does have a lot of horror elements. It is very different, well, not very different from the movie, but it is different from the movie. There is a lot more blood in this, in the novel. And if you've not read it, I highly recommend it. It is a little bit on the long side, but if you're into dinosaurs, if you're into creature features, I think you will really enjoy this one. Okay, we are up to favorite Y2K horror. This includes any book published from the years 2000 to 2019. I thought that was the easiest way to do this. There are 5 books in this category, and they are The Ruins by Scott Smith from 2006. Pen Pal by Dathan Auerbach from 2012. My Best Friend's Exorcism by Grady Hendrix from 2016. The Ballad of Black Tom by Victor Lavelle from 2016. Keep This to Yourself by Tom Ryan from 2019. And the boo goes to Pen Pal by Dathan Auerbach. This was such a surprise. I've heard for a long time that this is one of the creepiest books anyone's ever read, and I have to agree. This is one of the creepiest books I've ever read. I've never had a book that really creeped me out or disturbed me or unsettled me, but this one did all 3, and I really don't want to tell you anything about it. I think a lot of people know what it is. A lot of people have read it. It is definitely worth the hype. If you have not read this one, definitely check it out. The next category is favorite modern horror from 2020. So the majority of the books I read, I think, for 2022 were from the decade of the 2020s, but I wanted to divide these up. In 2021, I read the most books from that year. That's going to be in 2 different categories, but I did read 5 from 2020, and they are Eden by Tim Levin, Devil's Creek by Todd Kiesling, The Boatman's Daughter by Andy Davidson, Crossroads by Laurel Hightower, The Patient by Jasper DeWitt. And the boo goes to Devil's Creek by Todd Kiesling. This is such a good story. It is on the long side, but if you are into like religious stories, religious cults, and some very disturbing scenes involving some siblings, then yeah, you will definitely be into Devil's Creek. This is a story about, I think it was 5, maybe 7 half-siblings who were all offsprings of this demented preacher who died, but he has plans to come back. This is very, very good story, and yeah, it might take you a little bit to get through it, but it's definitely worth the read, and it is my favorite read that was published in 2020. Next is favorite modern horror from 2021. There are 8 books in this category. This is the category that has the most books because I couldn't narrow it down any further. And so yeah, let's just see what books I read from 2021. Pearl by Josh Mallerman, Near the Bone by Christina Henry, Slewfoot by Brahm, Dagger Hill by Devin Taylor, The Final Girl Support Group by Grady Hendrix, Paradise Club by Tim Meyer, Bathhouse by PJ Vernon, Slenderman by Anonymous, and The Boo Goes to Near the Bone by Christina Henry. I absolutely loved this story. I flew through it in 2 days back in January of 2022, I think it was. So it's been almost a year since I read it. I was debating whether this one or another one of these were my favorite. This one barely beat out Pearl, and I really loved reading this one. It's such a quick read. It is about a woman who is trapped in this isolated cabin with an older gentleman. We don't know at first if he's like her husband or whatever he may be. I don't want to say too much about it because it could be a little spoilerish, but while she's dealing with that, there is some kind of weird, dangerous creature roaming the mountainside. It's a very good wintry read. It's very fast-paced. I definitely recommend you check this one out. So the next category, I had 4 others from 2021. I didn't know what to do with them, and I hate to do this, but least favorite modern horror from 2021. There are 4 books in this category that just didn't do it for me. I don't have any of them anymore. I've already sold them all. So the nominees are Queen of Teeth by Haley Piper, Shelter for the Damned by Mike Thorne, Goddess of Filth by V. Castro, The House of Dust by Noah Broyles, and the boo for least favorite modern horror from 2021 goes to Goddess of Filth by V. Castro. I'm so sorry. I did not like this book at all. I did finish it because it was so short. This was the only book I gave a 1 star to in 2022. A lot of people seem to really like it, and it really confuses me because it was not very well written. It really wasn't. And the plot itself was very convoluted, and it really annoyed me that, oh, our friend might be possessed by something, so let's take her to a club and see what happens. What? No. It does have a positive message about women empowerment, which I can totally get behind, but me personally, I thought this was very poorly written. It read like some teenager wrote it. I'm sorry to say that. I hope V. Castro never reads or never watches this or never hears me, dog this book so much, and I'm sorry if you really liked it. I'm happy for you. It was not for me at all. I wish I'd never read it. I wish I'd DNF'd it. Yeah, it was my least favorite read of 2022. The last category is favorite new release that was published in 2022 that I actually read in 2022. That rarely happens where I can read a book in the year it was published. I did read 4 of these. The 4 that I did read, I'm going to announce the winner, and then I'm going to talk about the other 3 real quick because this is going to serve as my little December mini wrap-up. So, the nominees for favorite new release in 2022 are Hidden Pictures by Jason Rekulak, Suburban Hell by Maureen Kilmer, Hide by Kirsten White, Clown in a Cornfield 2, Friendo Lives by Adam Caesar, and the boo goes to Clown in a Cornfield 2, Friendo Lives by Adam Caesar. Yes, this was a 5-star read for me. I absolutely love this one. If you have not read the first Clown in a Cornfield, I suggest you go do so. This will contain a little bit of spoilers for that book, but I'm not going to spoil this book. So if you don't want to know anything about it, skip next to the final category. So this takes place a year after the events of the first book. Quinn has gone off to college in, I think it was Pennsylvania, and that leaves us with Rust and Cole, who at the end of the first book revealed that they were gay and secretly into each other. So in this book, they are together. It was so good to see them. They were on their way to visit Quinn in Pennsylvania from, I think it's Missouri. I think that's where these stories take place. But this was so good. It's so action-packed. It doesn't let up at all. I will say I didn't really like the last chapter of how that went. I think we're going to get a 3rd and final book in this series. I can't wait for that. But yeah, this has so much blood in it. I think it's even bloodier than the first one. I really like the first one. I absolutely love the sequel. And it really reminded me of Scream 2. So if you're a fan of the Scream franchise, I think you will really dig the Clown in a Cornfield series. So good. I really, really enjoyed this one. So it's definitely my favorite read, my favorite new release from 2022. Okay, let me talk about the other three real quick. I gave all three of these 3 stars. They're all average, they're all okay. The first one I want to talk about is Suburban Hell by Maureen Kilmer. This was a really good debut novel. For a debut, it was really well written. It's supposed to be like a dark comedy about a woman who gets possessed in a neighborhood, so it's reminiscent of shows like Desperate Housewives, about 4 women friends who live on the same street in the same neighborhood. One of them decides to build a she shed for their monthly gatherings, and during the construction they dig up something, and one of them becomes possessed. I'm sorry I'm having trouble getting this out, but it's been a month since I read it. It was really good. I thought I almost gave it 4 stars, but I wanted more cattiness between the 3 friends with their possessed friend. There's only maybe 1 or 2 times instances where they confronted Liz, and I just wanted more from it. Maybe not necessarily more gore, because there's very, very little horror that happens in this actually. But I really love the cover. I like the characters okay. I just really wanted more horror and more cattiness between the women. And I think if that had happened, it would have been a 5-star read for me. But that was Suburban Hell. I thought it was worth purchasing, worth reading. It's kind of cozy if you're into cozy little horror possession stories. Sahide by Kirsten White. I've heard a lot of mixed reviews about this one, but that can be said about all of these books, honestly. This was middle of the road, and I do understand why a lot of people don't like it. It's very light on the horror. It reads like a young adult novel, which I have no problems with, because Clown in a Cornfield 2 is a YA. That one really worked. It was really bloody. This one was not. So this is about a group of 14 strangers who goes to compete in this hide and seek tournament where the winner is supposed to receive like 25 grand or something like that. And there's like 2 of them that disappear each night or each day. They have the night to sleep and recuperate, but during the day they have to hide, and they don't know who they're hiding from. I'm not going to spoil that, but each night 2 of them disappear, and we know something's after them, okay? And it's like once the horror is about to happen, it cuts away to a different scene, a different chapter. So there's very little gore, very little blood in this one. We'll say I don't want to spoil it, but the thing that's hunting them, I thought, did have an original quality. We didn't get much page time with that thing. I don't want to spoil it, but if you know, you know. I didn't really care for the ending all that much. I think it would have been great if it had been more gory, it had been more adult-oriented characters. They're supposed to be in their 20s, and they seem like they were teenagers. This was Kirsten White's first adult horror novel. She mainly writes young adults, so that definitely shines through in this one. So I thought it was okay. It wasn't the worst thing I read, but it wasn't my favorite. And last was Hidden Pictures by Jason Rekulak. I don't get the hype for this one. I thought it was very middle of the road. I didn't really get bored reading it. It was a fast read. The pictures that were in here were very well drawn. It added to the story, I will say that. But I just think there are better stories out there involving recovering addicts, nannies in charge of maybe weird, creepy kids who are doing some creepy things. Like for Bathhouse, I thought that was a better main character who is a recovering addict. Or The Nesting by C.J. Cook, which I read last year, I think it was actually. And that is a story about a nanny and some supernatural things happen. I don't know how this won Best Horror on the Goodreads awards. I really don't. This is the best you all think for the year? I don't know. I've only read 4 of these to completion. I thought Clown in the Cornfield was a much better story than this one. I thought it was just okay. And you can basically see how this is going to play out from a mile away. And I just don't get it. It was okay. I gave it 3 stars. But I don't get the hype. I don't see how it won Best Horror for the year. And I think it's very overrated. It was my least favorite read of December. So this final category is Favorite Horror Book of the Year. I have 10 nominees here. I think I might just go in order from number 10 to number 1. If you're okay with that, why not? Let's do it. So my 10th favorite read of the year of 2022 goes to The Exorcist by William Peter Blatty. This is kind of a slow one, but if you're into slow burns, definitely want to read this one. Really enjoyed it. Very disturbing in some spots. So that is my number 10. Number 9 is Dagger Hill by Devin Taylor. This is a YA story. It is very much in the vein of Stranger Things. So if you're a fan of that show, I think you will really like this one. It's about a group of teenagers who hang out on this hill. A plane crashes down on them. They all get injured. One of them gets kidnapped by a man in a gas mask, and they have to figure out what the heck is going on. My 8th favorite read of the year is My Best Friend's Exorcism by Grady Hendrix. I really understand why this is a lot of people's favorite Grady Hendrix read. It is about some high schoolers who one of them gets possessed and the other one has to try to save her. Very good 80s read, set in the 80s. Love the cover. Definitely check it out if you've not read it. Number 7 is Slewfoot by Brom. Definitely worth the hype on this one. Almost everyone seems to really love it. I really loved it. Definitely a 5-star read. It has some cool artwork by Brom. It's about a woman who is an outcast in her Puritan village town, and she kind of becomes friends with the devil. He might be the devil. He don't know. She don't know. But it is such a good story set in the 1600s. My 5th favorite horror book of the year is Devil's Creek by Todd Kiesling. I already talked about this one. Definitely a great religious cult horror story. Definitely check it out. Number 5 is Clown in a Cornfield 2, Friend of Liz by Adam Caesar. Definitely love this one. All the rest of these from Slewfoot on were 5 stars. The other ones were 4.5 stars, so nothing below a 4.5 in this category. Definitely worth the read. I loved it. If you're in for a bloody good time, definitely read this one. Number 4 is The Ruins by Scott Smith. A lot of people don't like the characters in this one. There aren't any chapters in this book, so that was a little off-putting, but it's such a good story. If you're into body horror, this one does not hold back. It's very bleak. It's very depressing. The ending is, yes, The Ruins. You definitely need to read this one. I just rewatched the movie a few days ago. Both of them were great. Yeah, if you're into bleak body horror, gory ass stories, you want to read this one. Okay, top 3. Number 3, my 3rd favorite read of the year is Pearl by Josh Mallerman. This is about a telekinetic pig. He's like very dangerous. He gets people to do things they normally wouldn't do. I know a lot of people don't like it, but if you kind of go into it as a dark comedy, I think it might work better for you. I absolutely love this one. I almost put this above Near the Bone, which, spoiler alert, is my 2nd favorite. But yeah, definitely love this story. I loved Pearl. Such an original villain. I really, really, really love this one. Like I said, number 2, Near the Bone by Christina Henry. Definitely a good wintry story. It's about survival. Not only against man, but against monsters. Yeah, really, really, really love this story. I can't wait to read more by Christina Henry. And finally, my absolute number 1 favorite read of 2022 goes to Pen Pal by Dathan Auerbach. This story will stay with me forever, especially the ending, that scene towards the end. I don't think I'll ever forget that. Super creepy, very disturbing, unsettling, all of the horrific things you want from a book, you want to experience from a book. This one has almost all of it. It's not very bloody, but it is super creepy and is my favorite book that I read from 2022. that's it. Those are all the books that I read, DNF'd in 2022, 64 books in total, including the DNFs. Such an amazing reading year for me. I'm super proud of myself. Of course, a lot of things were sacrificed in order to read so much, but I had a great time with almost all of these. The majority of what I read were at least 3 stars or above. There were very little 2.5 stars. There was 1 star, a few DNFs, but overall, I had a great year. I read from so many different decades and centuries and different kinds of horror. I'm super glad with how everything turned out. Definitely let me know what's your favorite reads of 2022 were. I would love to know. Have you read any classics from the 1800s? Have you read any from the 1900s? It's so weird to me to say the 1900s because for me, I was born in the 70s, the late 70s. And so I grew up in the 80s and the 90s, and it just seems odd to me that the 90s were 30 years ago. So crazy. But yeah, so definitely let me know what were some of your favorite reads from 2022. What were your least favorites? Let me know all that. If you've read any of the classics, if you've read any of the modern stuff, the new releases, let me know it all down in the comments. I really appreciate you all sticking around, watching my videos, subscribing. If you haven't subscribed, definitely do that. Hit the notification bell because I'm going to be posting a lot less this year. I want to take time to do some other things, so you definitely want to get notified whenever I do drop a video. This one is going out the first week of January, and later in the month I'm going to be going to my Grady Hendrix meet and greet thing. That video will premiere in February, and after that I'm just going to take it one day at a time, 1 week at a time, 1 book at a time. Come over on Instagram. I'll be more active over on there. I do want to take a little break from YouTube. It does take a lot of time and effort to make these videos. Sometimes it doesn't seem worth it, to be honest, but I do enjoy talking about books, reading books, hearing from you guys about what your favorite books were. And I do want to continue. I will pick up YouTube again a little more in the future. So I'm not quitting. I'm just going on a little hiatus. Okay. So definitely stick around, hit the notification bells. I can't even talk. I've been talking for like 30, 40 minutes. I don't know. But I do really appreciate all of you who watch these videos, subscribe, like, comment, all that fun stuff. But yeah, definitely come over to Instagram. Check me out over there. Michael's Boomin' Books. And yes, thank you so much. Hope you all have a great day. I hope you all have a fantastic reading year, a super great 2023, and I will see you in the next one.